course, you can't get a date because of your job. Share your story with us. You never know, maybe we can help. After all, it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. 1-800-241-4377. All right, surprise time. Debbie Fleming. Hi, how are you? Would you stand up with me? I believe you have some.
Hi, you're tuned to Cafe Cabaret, and tonight we're going to present the wrong hero in post-atomic fables. So, Steve, having a little bit in the way of technical difficulties, but don't let it worry you none. After all, I've been doing this for so long, I can overcome any difficulties or surmount any problems. Oh, by the way, the video component you see will be new open stage, even though it's actually the wrong hero who's doing all of the talking, much to your dismay, because I'm sure you'd rather see new open stage, but that's the way the ball bounces. So without much further ado, post-atomic fables, and away we go. Wow, this is something that I've been meaning to do for quite some time, but haven't quite gotten around to doing. Basically, what I'd like to do is tell some fables, which are fables that are not necessarily timeless, in fact, fables which are right up to the minute. But first, perhaps I should expound somewhat on my theory of the post-atomic world. Basically, the Great Depression changed everything, because prior to that, we were, the majority of this country, the United States, was in fact rural, or at the very least had something of a rural sensibility, and of course witness prohibition and stuff, which is basically the rural mentality being inflicted upon the sinful big city. Well, with the Great Depression, of course, the first thing that went was prohibition, and the Great Depression led to World War II in ways which I'm not going to really get into, since it's not really my place to impart unto you all a history lesson. But yes, and then World War II, yeah, yes, and then World War II led to well, Hiroshima, and of course that was the forbidden fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and you know, men become as gods, and you know, we were exiled from the Garden of Paradise and all that crap. And but you know what gets me is that, you know, Nagasaki kind of got the shitty end of the stick in this whole deal. I mean, they got all of the fallout, but none of the publicity, if you know what I'm getting at here. Yeah, I mean, it's not much of a glory, but Hiroshima at least had the glory of being the first site that was populated and was nuked to hell and gone. But poor Nagasaki, everybody sort of overlooks Nagasaki, and that's a shame. You know, that's this thing called sad. So, like I said, they got the shitty end of the stick. But anyway, with the post-atomic mentality, everything that we had hitherto taken for granted has become something of a back number. So let me tell you some of these post-atomic fables. Once upon a time, there was a girl who lived in a city in upstate New York named Emily, and she felt that her dreams would never come true. She wanted romance, a marriage, a man on a white charger to come along and swoop her up and you know, take her places and stuff. And but you know, she was kind of plain and and so she went to the kindly old family doctor, who said, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to stop thinking of yourself as being plain, and I want you to go to the beauty parlor and have them fix you up real nice, and I want you to go to the dress store, and I want you to have the sales lady pick you out a dress, not one that you like, but one that she thinks looks good on you. Then I want you to go to a party, and I want you to talk to every person in that room. That's your assignment. Talk to every person in that room and ask them what you can do for them. You see, you're not going to this party just to have a good time. You're going there to introduce strangers to each other, and you'll see that things will be very different at the end of this party, because you'll be helping other people. And so she decides to follow this quack's advice, and she goes to the hairstylist, who of course gives her the most expensive hairdo and ruins her hair with cheap dyes and damaging harsh chemicals, so that it begins falling out in big clumps. But of course, she's too meek and mousy and dowdy to complain. And then she goes to the dress store, and of course the dressmaker sells her the most expensive item on the rack, which is made of shoddy material, even though purportedly manufactured and hand-stitched in Paris, is actually made in Paris, Texas, by undocumented aliens, and who are paid a bare pittance, and of course they don't do the hand-stitching, they just 10 gigantic machines which chop their fingers off, and that's NAFTA for you. Anyway, so she gets this expensive dress, and she's broke, and she has to walk to the party, and she's all sweaty, and people like smell her the second she walks in the room. But she decides to follow the good doctor's advice, and she begins introducing everybody to everybody else, and everybody starts looking at her in a different light. They start saying, "Hey, here's somebody I can take advantage of," and so they do. And before too long, she has to declare bankruptcy. Her life is utterly and inexplicably ruined, and the doctor has skipped town with the expensive fee that he charged her for dispensing this rather dubious advice. And so she decides that maybe she'll join the Peace Corps, but they won't take her because she's doesn't have any real aptitude for anything. And so in the end, what happens is she decides to move away from upstate New York and get a temp job in New York City. And the first night she's there, she's murdered. The end. Sorry, I mean, I wanted this to be more upbeat. I wanted her to like meet the man of her dreams at this party, and I wanted everybody to have her say, "Oh, what a lovely girl." But this is not the way it happened. And they always say something is based on a true story, but what you have to remember is everything is based on a true story. And if I really wanted to be harsh, I could tell you exactly how she met her doom. But I mean, that wouldn't be very productive to tell you that she was found in a boiler room with her head split open after having a needle sticking out of her arm. But I mean, guess what happens when you hang out with people whose names are Scutch and Butch and things like that. I don't know quite how to put this exactly. It's just a sad fact of urban life.
Polyester crap. And to be
Yes.
sure, the store window was chock full of gaudy raiment of every stripe.
And so polyester crap, and you hang out with dogs, and you wake up with fleas, So anyway, here's another of my very special postmodern fables, and I'd like you to know, by the way, that I'm sort of improvising these things. I'm making them all up, but they're all true stories, you see. So I'm beginning to sound like Ross Perot here. You see, and he doesn't say or anything like that. He doesn't say anything that indicates that perhaps He indicates that he is in fact the person who is creating the reality, and so it's you see. Okay, here's another one. Once upon a time, there was a fellow who wanted to. He had a grocery store, and he didn't want to sell it to the city slicker, and well, I don't know. It's well, it was a grocery store. An old guy, he had a grocery, and he didn't want to sell it. And so this city slicker comes to town, and he says, well, I want to buy your store. And then the guy says, no, I ain't selling at any price. This store is a public trust. It was handed down to me from my father and from his father before him. And before that, who knows? This is probably just a howling wasteland here. But nevertheless, I intend to be here until this city once again becomes a howling wasteland. And the city slicker says, well, that may happen sooner than you think. You see, I'm determined to open a store in this town. For what reason, I'm not prepared to explain, either to you or to the world at large. Basically, it's just to put you out of business. If you won't sell to me at my price, then I will have to establish a mercantile establishment directly across the street from yours with all new stuff, and you're going to go out of business, and that'll be the end of it, and then I'll have gotten my wish, which basically isn't really very well described motivationally, but nevertheless, there you have it. I just don't want you to be in business anymore, and that's that. And so the guy says, well, go ahead and do your worst. And so the guy opens up his store, and all the townspeople come flocking to him instead of to the old merchant who they've known for years, which goes to show how fickle and duplicitous people can be. It's like I never did trust that old storekeeper anyway. His meat was bad. He always weighed the meat with his thumb on the scale. He never gave you a discount, and the wrapping paper, it weighs something too. But he never bothers to account for that. So we're paying meat prices for wrapping paper, and some of that stuff's been in his store since the Wilson administration, and let's go to this new place. They might charge another penny more, but their stuff is new. It doesn't have dust all over it and crap and E. coli floating around, and the meat slicer gets cleaned every day, and we don't have some grumpy old storekeeper who stubborn old fool, and so they go to the new store, and the old guy goes out of business, and he commits suicide, and that's that. The end. I mean, sorry, I'd like it to be, again, I'd like it to be a happy ending where both stores prosper, and the townspeople, like, divide, what I'd like it to be is they go to the new guy's place, buy out all the loss leaders, then go back to the old guy's store and buy his stuff that's marked up, and so the new guy goes out of business and the old guy is more prosperous than ever before. That would be a win-lose situation. I'd like it to be, a win-win for both of them, or maybe even a lose-lose for both of them. Actually, no. The new store also goes out of business because all the townspeople say, "Oh, there's no parking around here. Let's go to that new big supermarket on the outskirts of town and forget these two jokers always squabbling, trying to cut each other's prices down to the bone, and never succeeding, and charging that much more for other stuff, and forget them. I mean, we're just go to this supermarket and we won't play these foolish games." And so they do, and both of them go out of business. And the old storekeeper commits suicide, and the new guy goes on to another town to pull the same stunt. His specialty, you see, is not opening up stores, but making elderly storekeepers commit suicide because he's just perverse that way. Um, okay. Once upon a time, there was a poor farmer, and they had 6 kids, and all 6 of them left the farm, and then one came back. But then the one who came back decided that this farm life was not for him, and so he married this chorus girl, and they moved to New York City and were crushed in a terrible elevated train accident. I mean, I wanted it to be, that the two who decided to make a go of the farm end up being more prosperous than the other 5 brothers who decided to leave. But that's not the way things happen. They were bought out by a big agribiz combine, and for pennies on the dollar, incidentally, and that was that. I mean, either that or they stayed on the farm and they died of pesticide poisoning or something like that. I'm sorry, I want these stories to be nice for you, but it seems that real life has an inconvenient way of getting in the way and tampering with things. So one day here's another story. Once upon a time there was a girl named Rosa, and she wanted to be a great artist, but her family was poor and they couldn't afford to hire a model for her. So she had to paint farm machinery, and she got an exhibition at the Armory Show in 1913, and that was that. I mean, no one ever heard of her again, because who wants to look at pictures of machinery? It gets kind of old rather fast. You think maybe she'd paint still lives or horses or cows or something, whatever was at hand. But no, she wanted either people or machinery, and she picked machinery, and she went out with the Cubists, and her painting was right next to Nude Descending a Staircase and the Duchamp toilet later on. And the art world is fickle and unpredictable. I mean, you can't really rely on it to recognize things of quality. So that's the end of that story. Once upon a time, there was a sweet-voiced Irishman who liked to sing songs, and now he decided that the songs he was singing weren't going over the way he would have liked. So instead, he starts singing dirty songs and disgraces his old father, who disowns him. And then he gets further up in the music business, and he becomes a music publisher, and he disseminates hate-filled lyrics and stuff that makes teenagers commit suicide en masse. And then finally, of course, from being a music publisher, he becomes in quick succession, a record producer and finally the chief executive of a music company. One day he wakes up, looks at himself in the mirror, and says, "You know, there's something not right about me doing all this terrible stuff, this polluting the airwaves with hate-filled songs. But then again, as long as it's making me money, I'm going to keep going on doing it." And so he did. And that man, you may recognize his name. Of course, I'm under certain legal constraints not to give it, but you would recognize his record logo anywhere. Let me assure you. And you know, he picked up quite a few really good artists in the early '80s, like John Lennon. I said too much. Anyway, so now, in the end. Now I wanted you to I wanted to tell you this story where, oh no, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to be more prosperous than ever because I'm being true to myself. But that's just not the way things happen. So much for that. Well, let's see. Here was a no room at the inn story. Once upon a time, there was a wealthy man traveling incognito, as wealthy men are very prone to do because, of course, they like going up to hotel clerks and being treated in an insolent manner. So one time he was traveling incognito during some big, in New York City during some big convention, and there, of course, were no rooms to be had anywhere. And so he went up to this hotel clerk, and the clerk was concerned for him. He had a genuine interest in the welfare of the hotel patrons, unlike the vast majority of concierges and hotel clerks and whatnot that you're likely to encounter in New York City, even under the beneficent administration of Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. So, anyway, he goes up to this guy. This guy is one in a million, this hotel guy. You know, he says, "Well, you know, we're all out of rooms and stuff. Really, there's no place anywhere in town for you to stay," which is kind of unlikely because, you know, New York, I mean, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands. And like I'm saying, this guy's rich. He's not like some poor slob. You know, he's rich, although he doesn't, like, wear the big pinky ring and whatever it is that rich people wear, the cravat. He doesn't talk as though he has a mouthful of brandy, you know. Well, me and love you know, he's not rich like rich, you know. He's sort of like some guy that has who's oodles of money, but it's not like sticking out of his pockets. He's not like flashing his kale, and he's not like tossing greenbacks and strewing them in his path to form like a carpet for him to walk on so that his feet don't touch the ground. Now, that's a funny thing about money, you know. The more money you have, the less your feet touch the ground. I mean, I don't mean literally, although, I mean, I suppose if you wanted to throw dollar bills in your path, I mean, they're practically worthless anyway. They're sort of like, you know, rose petals cost more, worth more. And, I mean, you know, be it money or rose petals that you strew in your path, when you have the big, long green, your feet never touch the ground. You're golden. But this guy, for whatever idiotic reason, and you know, some of these old rich cranks, I mean, they get kind of kooky, and they you know, they do foolish things like pretending not to be rich, which is, you know, kind of stupid. I mean, it's one thing to be poor and to pretend to be rich, you know, because someone might actually fall for it and treat you a little nicer, but to be rich and then pretend to be poor, I mean, what kind of fucked up game is that? I mean, this guy's a real sicko when you think about it. And so, anyway, yeah, he's rich, he's pretending to be poor, and the desk clerk takes pity on him and says, "Well, there's no rooms here, but we do have a broom closet, and we could fix it up for you." And so the rich guy, he drops his mask, and he says, "Well, you know, I'm actually really wealthy, and if you had been prepared to offer me a room, I could have rewarded you beyond your wildest dreams. But instead, I'm going to buy this hotel just for the express purpose of putting you out of a job." And the hotel clerk, who was no dummy actually, says, "Well, you can go ahead and do that, but I'll just find a job somewhere else." And so the rich guy says, "Well, then I'll make it my business to buy every hotel in New York and put you out of a job just for the satisfaction of seeing that you are punished for your insolence." And so the hotel clerk says, "Well, go ahead and try it, you old fool." And then he picks up the phone and he calls the people over at Bellevue and he says, "Psst, we got a real live one here. Come over, Toots Sweet, and bring the butterfly nets." And sure enough, by the time the old man finishes his harangue and walks out the door, a whole bunch of white-coated attendants are there, and they scoop him up and they take him to a nice sanitarium in upstate, and so everybody's happy. The hotel clerk keeps his job, and the rich man has a nice place to stay. The end. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, this story shouldn't have ended like that. It should have been that the rich man was so grateful that he decided to buy a hotel just for the hotel clerk to manage. And but no, it's not. No, it didn't work out that way. Um, Now, who is more at fault here? The man from the insane asylum who wrongfully imprisons this wealthy eccentric, or the wealthy eccentric himself, or the hotel clerk? I say the wealthy eccentric had no business going around pretending not to be wealthy. When you have money, flaunt it. I mean, anything else is like a crime. It's being a hypocrite. I mean, there is such a thing as reverse hypocrisy, if you know what I'm saying. Uh, like, oh, I'm just a dummy, that kind of thing. I mean, when you're actually Einstein going around saying, oh, I'm stupid, I'm so stupid, I don't know what a whole bunch of nines are, but I invented the theory of relativity. See, that's the hypocrisy. That's where the hypocrisy comes in, because, you're putting on this mask where you're weaker than you actually are, right, and that's supposed to be humble and shit, but no, then it turns out, oh, I'm Superman, I'm going to beat your living tar out of you. Or that's a stunt that Spider-Man is more likely to pull, particularly in the newspaper comic strips which bear his name, which bear little relationship to the comic books in which Spider-Man makes his prestigious appearances. The comic strip has really gone downhill. I mean, it's a bunch of incomprehensible nonsense. It really started going downhill at issue number 100 of The Amazing Spider-Man. Prior to that, it was copacetic. After that, pretty sad. But then it sort of picked up steam again in about 1980 or thereabouts. After about 8 years in the wilderness, where Gwen dies, his blonde girlfriend who has no personality. She falls off a bridge, right, and he snags her with his webbing and she breaks her neck. God, brilliant move. He's done this thing like thousands of times. The one time he does it when it matters, when it's not some crumb bum plummeting off of a parapet, but it's his girlfriend falling off of a bridge. The one time he does it when it matters, she breaks her neck. Isn't that luck for you, or what? What I liked was the early Spider-Mans where he'd get the flu and he'd lose his powers and have to fight Dr. Octopus. Stuff like that. And then Dr. Octopus would rip his mask off and everybody would say, why, it's Puny Parker. He couldn't be Spider-Man. I mean, come on, you idiots. He's dressed in a goddamn spider suit. How many spider suits are there kicking around Queens, the borough, I mean, the people in this strip was just so stupid. And, Peter Parker, he's supposed to be a big science major and all that. He can't even find a job. He's still doing stupid photography for that idiotic newspaper of his, that horrendous rag, the Daily Bugle. I mean, would you buy a paper whose every editorial had to do not with NAFTA or the GATT or the ozone hole or global warming? No, every editorial is about how much the publisher hates Spider-Man. Would you read a paper like that? I mean, it would get kind of old after a month or so. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I sort of digress somewhat. But anyway, the Spider-Man, that's a Spider-Man stunt. Pretend to be weak, and then turn around and beat the living tar out of somebody who's been persecuting you. People love to see that stuff. It's so predictable, too. Like every 2 years or so, something like this happens in Spider-Man, in the comic strip. So anyway, and how old is Stan Lee anyway? I mean, he was probably about 20 years old in 1947. I mean, he must be like 70 now or something. How much longer is he going to continue, like, dicking around with Spider-Man? Why doesn't the guy go out and write a book or something, Well, what would he call it, though? My 50 years with Spider-Man? I don't... Sheesh. And when is Spider-Man going to, like, start aging a little bit, I mean, he's still the same feckless 28-year-old he was 10 years ago, basically. I mean, when is he going to start, getting heartburn and indigestion and stuff like that? The strip prided itself on being, like, realistic and stuff, even though it started out as kind of a corny, a corny ripoff of Batman. But now it's like, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to muddle along. Anyway, there's another story I'd like to tell you. Once upon a time, there was a newspaper boy, a newsboy, right? And he was the sole support of his family and all that other sentimental crap. And well, Anyway, you know, he was selling papers and shit, and this guy on a trolley sort of sticks a nickel out the window and says, "Here, give me a paper." And the kid hands him the paper, but the fat man on the trolley doesn't give him the nickel. The trolley speeds off. Obviously, this is like about 90 years ago, back when there were horse-drawn trolleys and crap like that in New York City. And then this big boxer comes up in a fine carriage drawn by horses. I mean, this whole stuff, let's liven this story up a little bit. Let's see. I mean, I don't want it just to take place in the year 1905, you know, the Pure Food and Drug Act, all that crap. Let's see. Once there was this guy on the corner and he was selling drugs, and this fat man in a Cadillac comes up and says, "Here, yo, give me a gram." And then the kid throws the gram into the front seat of the caddy. The guy teasingly holds out a $20 bill and then roars off without paying for it. And so, you know, the kid tries chasing him and shit, but he can't catch him because he's wearing baggy pants and he trips over him. And so then this older guy comes up and says, "Oh, yo, I'm going to go after that guy. You wait here." So he goes after the guy, or he pretends to, but he doesn't really. Then he comes back, panting, and says to the kid, "Get off my corner. This is my corner to sell drugs." And you know, the kid doesn't make any money that day, and then even worse, you know, he comes back to the corner the next day, and there's a cop waiting for him because the other dealer had you know, ratted him out, and the kid didn't have any friends, so he couldn't get his friends to go after the guy who ratted him out. And he didn't even know the guy's name, so that when he went to prison, he couldn't even tell everybody that so-and-so was a snitch, so that they could, like, steer clear of him. And the kid spends, you know, he's a kid, right? He's not, like, 16, so, you know, he spends about 2 years in reform school and becomes a hardened criminal, and then he goes to the penitentiary, and that's it. I mean, he's dead at the age of 25, and all because some guy in a Cadillac wouldn't give him 20 bucks. Although, you know, that's not the only reason this happened. And I wanted the story to be something like, "Yo, I'm going to go after this guy, get your money for you, give it, and come back, give him the money. Don't let guys like that sour you on the whole human race, kid." You know, and then the kid is inspired to go on and do something more suitable to his talents than selling drugs. And then he realizes years later that the guy never chased the fella in the Cadillac. He just gave him 20 bucks and told him that he had, and given him a black eye and stuff. But that's not the way it happened, and I'm sorry. I'd like to be able to say that it was, you know, all hunkadory and stuff, and that the kid later went on to become the head of the NAACP or whatever, or you know, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or a popular and beloved television entertainer, or a prize-winning basketball star, or what have you. And you know, the thing is, you might be able to detect some implicit racism here, because, you know, obviously the kid I'm talking about is black, but I'm too chicken-hearted to say this, because, you know, I don't want to offend any sensibilities or step on any toes or corns, and you know, I don't want to, like, get my heel and grind it into your foot and say, "Ha ha ha, I'm telling racist stories on the air and there's nothing you can do about it." No, see, the thing is, the kid doesn't have to be black. I mean, this could be a white kid dealing drugs. It's not only black people that deal drugs. Hispanic people deal them, Oriental people deal them, and white people. White people came up with the whole idea, didn't they? I mean, didn't they? I mean, before there were even any black people in this country, I'm sure there was some Puritan hanging around selling grog on a street corner. Trouble is with that theory, you know, assuming that white people were the first ones to deal drugs, well, first of all, historically, that's not strictly accurate that white people were the first people in this country. Actually, there were slave ships in 1619, and the Mayflower came in 1620. Black people are every bit as much a part of this country as white people. They have been here every bit as long, and by, like, you know, segregating them and creating an artificial dictatorship of virtue and saying, well, you know, white people started the whole thing. No, people started the whole thing. It wasn't black people or white people. It was people. Let's, you know, on the one hand, we can't pretend that these problems don't exist and that racism isn't a potent factor. On the other hand, we can't deny that, you know, people who are oppressed are forced to, you know, go outside the normal channels, and they can't rely on the old boy network to propel them to status. And I mean, it's a tough choice. I mean, should you be, a virtuous hypocrite, or are you a racist? I mean, one or the other, right? There's got to be a middle ground somewhere. You got to try to I don't know, deal with these problems in a mature and adult manner, or at least in an immature and adolescent manner, which nonetheless is honest, as adolescents have a tendency to be, perhaps inconveniently, and according to their own deluded lights because of their lack of experience, but nevertheless, you know, they tend to be more out front, like, hey man, that dude's ugly, like, well, thanks Mr. Tact, but anyway, so, now that I've gotten myself in a whole lot of Dutch, let's proceed on to the next story. How many stories have I told so far? I mean, apart from the Spider-Man digression, let's see, that was one, that was two, that was three. This has been a very productive day. This is four. I haven't skipped one yet. Let's see, that's five, and six, seven. Well, that's not bad. 7 stories, and it's how much longer do I have here? Gee, I wish I could really devote the amount of time that I saw fit to 7 stories in half an hour. That's not bad. I mean, and I should. These are like impromptu, spontaneous stories, and I really should try to write these down and stuff, because these are good stories, right? I mean, and let's say that the subset of these stories is getting along in the world, okay? These are all stories about getting along in the world. And perhaps in future weeks, I mean, this has been very productive, I mean, I'm generating a lot more material here than I thought I would be capable of generating, and I'm very, very happy so far with the way these stories are turning out. And you know what? When people tell stories, right, like, short stories, fictional short stories and stuff, they never bother to say in the body of the text, I'm very happy with the way this story is coming out so far. But that's yet another postmodern innovation that you will only find on the Wrong Heroes award-winning program. You're not going to find it in any of the other people who take other people's discarded footage and do an audio dub over it. You're not going to find it. I mean, only the Wrong Hero would dare, and so I mean, that's the way it is, right? So maybe we should take a break here. I don't know. See, it's tough. I got to get to work and get. I want to finish doing this the right way. So it's kind of tough. And you know what else I've mastered? I've mastered the ability to talk and read at the same time, and the talking is completely disconnected to the reading. And that's cool, because although it makes it so that I'm sort of speaking in a rather halting tone of voice, nevertheless, it's very productive, because then I can scan over the topic of my discussion at the same time, keeping a constant patter going, which of course is probably giving you a headache. But I have a feeling at the end of this, there's going to be all sorts of credits rolling and stuff that have nothing to do with me, the Wrong Hero. But just ignore them. This is the Wrong Hero, and these are post-atomic fables. And anyway, once upon a time, there was a great explorer who, when he was in high school, broke his ankle while he was wrestling. And he was all disconsolate about this. It was a boarding school he went to, you see. He was a stuck-up swell, but actually no, it was a boarding school. I'm changing the story here because I'm just trying to remember it the way it really happened. Although of course this is totally fictional, except it's based on real life. So I mean, here's the weird thing. This is a true story that I'm altering to a certain degree so that it's not recognizable as true, right? But not only that, but the degree to which I'm altering it is also based on other true facts, but not the same true facts as the actual true story. So it's a true story based on true events, but altered in such a way that it's the true events are other true events that have nothing to do with the original true story. And this is the way fiction works, damn it. I mean, you don't think people just make this stuff up out of thin air. I mean, something's got to happen to them in such a way that gives them some ability to expound at great length about how these processes work. And even though they're not supposed to. And that's another thing. You never hear in a story people say, well, this is based on a true story, but I changed some of the stuff, and then I changed some of the other stuff, and I sort of mixed and matched. Basically it's based on 3 true stories, and I took elements from each of them and stuck them in like modules or something. I didn't even know what a module was until like a week or 2 ago. A module is basically just a fancy way of saying you're breaking something up into 2 or 3 parts, into modules. And you know how it is when you first hear a word used, and then you hear it again and again? It's because you're like alert to listen for it, right? I mean, there's an easy explanation for that, but there's no real explanation for the fact that maybe you listen carefully to everything, and you first hear the word module a week ago, like I did, at the Kennedy School of Government Library. Somebody asked me what a module was. I didn't know. I wasn't going to look up in the dictionary, because it probably had a specialized meaning. But what it really meant was a course that's broken up into 2 parts, and you can take 1/2 course, and then you can take the other half course, and that's 2 modules, or you can take the whole course, and that's a course. And then I was at a seminar yesterday up in Newton for library stuff, and the woman used the word module, and I'm like, whoa, this module word here, it's getting a lot of play lately, at least in my own misbegotten life, academia bound as I am. Anyway, gee, what's going on here? I hope it's not tape recording over my program here. No. Okay, good. But that would be bad, Anyway, once upon a time there was this kid. He was a middle-class kid. This is the true part, right? It wasn't. See, originally it was a college man who broke his foot in college, and I guess he was well-to-do. But in this story that I'm telling, it's a middle-class kid who's going to an exclusive prep school, and even though he didn't actually break his foot while wrestling, he just sprained his arm or something, or sprained his back, or sprained his ankle. I'm going to say he broke his foot. So anyway, there's this middle-class kid going to this swank prep school that his parents could barely afford, and he was on partial scholarship, and that's how I knew him, because I was on full scholarship, and he was my roommate, and they stuck us together because I guess they figured that it would be too much to put me in the same room with an upper-class kid, so they stuck me with a middle-class kid because I was lower class, and then the middle-class kid could elevate me up slowly, could ramp me up, so to speak, to the middle-class level, and then we'd both be fit to room separately with upper-class people who would give us these upper-class notions and such, and enable us to mingle in upper-class society, which never happened in his case. He went to Trinity or somewhere like that in Connecticut, which is where he was from, and I went to Harvard, of course, where I was totally out of place, except not really, because half the kids there are on scholarship anyway. So, in other words, I was sort of a preppy, kind of, but I was stuck with no money. What could be a worse fate in this country than a preppy with no money? I mean, when you're a lower class person and you have no money, it's like, oh, hey, he's my lower class buddy. Like, I'm lower class, he's lower class, let's hang out together, we'll help each other where we can. But when you're a preppy, it's like, I don't want to hang out with that snob. But then when you hang out with the other preppies, they say, oh, I don't want to be with that Bulgarian, and you're stuck, You're neither here nor there. Anyway, this isn't about me, it's about him. Or at least the half my college roommate and half the famous explorer Richard E. Byrd, this half and half man. Anyway, he wanted to be a great explorer, but he broke his foot in high school wrestling and was never able to become a great explorer. Oh, no. He still wanted to be an explorer, right? But then he said, no, I can't be an explorer. I have a broken bone in my foot. I'll die. So he becomes an aviator instead. And he crashes at the North Pole and dies anyway. But at least he has his dream of discovering the North Pole, see, because he crashed his plane into it. And, well, that was not the most successful story. But in real life, what happened, of course, is that Admiral Richard E. Byrd broke his foot in college and became an aviator and pursued his grand dream in spite of all obstacles, and is famous now, kind of. Anyway. Well, anyway, uh, this is a nice tale called Once Upon a Time There Was a Ragged Stranger. And that's it. I mean, he was a ragged stranger. Can you imagine nowadays referring to somebody as a ragged stranger? I mean, you, I mean, nobody really walks around dressed in rags anymore, do they? I mean, they do, right? But they're not really rags. They're like used clothing. I mean, this is a land of such opportunity that even the people who dress in rags, they're nice rags. You know what I'm saying? Like Billy Ruane. Are you familiar with Billy Ruane? He always wears this incredibly shabby clothing, right? But it's nice shabby clothing. He dresses in expensive rags, basically. This is not Billy Ruane, by the way. This is some guy wearing a bandana. I thought bandanas went out with the hippie days. What's going on with this dude anyway? Hey, dude, like, what are you wearing that bandana for, huh? So, anyway, geez, it's almost 11:30. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to tell this one last story, and then I'm going to repeat some footage. It's really too bad that I have to repeat this footage, but you might appreciate it more having heard it for a second time. Okay. Once upon a time, there was not a ragged stranger, but let's say some guy that nobody knew who was dressed in clothing that was not entirely appropriate. And see, I'm putting my own little PC spin on it because it's not nice to refer to people as strangers or to characterize them as ragged, when, as a matter of fact, it is merely a citizen, just like the rest of us, who just happens to be at this moment down on his luck and dressed in attire which is not entirely appropriate. So, anyway, and then, talking about inappropriate attire, I went to my high school graduation. You see, I went to this junior high school, and then I left town for years, and I came back for the graduation ceremony so I could hang out with all my chums from 8th grade, and I was dressed in ragged shorts that had a big split right in the crotch, and a really shabby looking t-shirt with, at least it had a logo on it. It wasn't an undershirt. You ever notice this? You walk down the street in the undershirt, and people say, oh, look at this guy. But if you walk down the street in the same undershirt, but it has some sort of corporate logo on it, all of a sudden you're fully dressed, and you can get into any fancy restaurant under $20 per serving. But it's funny how that works. Like, as long as you affiliate with something. But anyway, I went to this high school thing, and the old music teacher said, I wish you hadn't have come. You're not dressed appropriately. It's like, oh, hell with you anyway, you senile old coot. But anyway, the story we're trying to tell here is about the ragged man. He was flashing this fancy-looking pocket knife, and this kid says, say. Back then, they all were very prone to saying things like, say. Anyway, the kid says, say, stranger, can I buy that pocket knife from ye? And the ragged stranger says, no, kid, it'll cost you 35 cents. Haven't got 35 cents, says the kid. So the ragged stranger says, and he was a ragged stranger. I'm going to just come right out and say it, let's call a spade a spade. I mean, the guy was a ragged stranger. There's no getting around it. So he says, yeah, you can have the knife, but you got to give me 35 cents. But I don't got 35 cents. Well, you save that 35 cents up. He goes to the storekeeper and he lays the knife down and he says, look, here's a knife. You give it to the kid when he hands over the 35 cents, and then you can have it. So the kid goes around and does all sorts of odd jobs, and back then a penny was worth like $10 or something, and so, basically the kid is paying $350 for a crummy old pen knife that's probably crawling with disease that some old hobo once owned. And so he comes back with the 35 cents, and there's the phone, and I better answer it. Let me answer the phone here. Hello? Hi. How you doing? Yes. Oh no, it's when somebody of Hispanic origin keeps calling up and babbling in Spanish into the phone, and I keep telling them that it's a wrong number. But I don't think they understand. asking for anybody. That's the weird thing. You're just saying, hello? And I don't know. No, I don't. Um, I don't think that's it. But that might work. Right. This is an evil number. So what's up by you? I was going to call you anyway. What do you want for supper? Steaky? Alright. Okay. Yes. Will do. I'll be a little late coming home, but not too late. Yeah. Alright. Alright. Actually, you called at a bad time. I have to be at work in less than half an hour. So, okay. I won't have time, but okay. Alright. Will do. Well, that was my girlfriend, and she wanted me to pick up a broom and sweep the kitchen. Well, it is kind of, it does need a broom. Anyway, I get to go to the store and buy something for supper, which is good. It's good. So anyway, the last of these post-atomic fables, or whatever I'm calling them, yeah, the old hobo, right, or whatever you want to call him, the man of hobo-like. I mean, there are no hobos anymore. I mean, nobody rides the rails. I mean, maybe they hitchhike, but anyway, I'm getting ahead of my point here, which is, so the kid saves up, and he pays $350 in 1997 currency for a crummy penknife that some old hobo's been hauling around, crawling with filth and disease. And as it turns out, you know, the kid comes back and for the knife, and his 35 cents is gone, and so is the knife. And the old hobo is sort of like insolently standing around going, hey kid, I got the knife and the 35 cents and you ain't got jack. You know, if I had been a tough, smart guy like this when I was your age, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. As a matter of fact, and then he stabs the kid with the penknife and takes the rest of his money and skips town on the first train, you know, and years later, he's never heard from again, and the kid is still wondering about this. And the moral of this story, insofar as a moral can be drawn from such a horrendous tale, is don't trust strange hobos and stay away from them, especially if they have filthy knives that you covet. So, anyway, now for the remainder of this program, which has got another 13 minutes or so to go, I guess we're going to listen to the wrong hero as he expounds on the great American novel.
They wouldn't realize they were being raised by robots and being generated into a form of people who created robots. Paul Titcomb, 27, a technician, said, a road trip across the country in a broken down 75 Volkswagen Dasher, sort of a robin's egg blue. Meg Herbig contributed, unsolicited, the interesting information that she had once heard a song, the chorus of which went, Penguin at the Waldorf, sitting in a big plus chair. What on earth, I said, exasperated, is a big plus chair? That's what I always wanted to know, she replied. Are you sure it's not a big plush chair? That's not the way he said it, she mildly replied. I saw that I would get nowhere with this line of argument and turned my attention to Carl. Carl spoke at length regarding a toy soldier he had bought in Germany with a parachute attached, which, owing to an overcomplicated propulsion mechanism and unclear directions in German, translated into an even more confusing English, would not, when the attached balloon was inflated, fly, and therefore, in consequence, was not very much fun, in spite of the German exhortation, Viel Spaß beim Fliegen mit dem Jet Astronauten. Have a lot of fun with your jet astronaut. The instructions included, during the first air supply by breathing, pull balloon with your left hand because in the astronaut's interior space is to be placed the balloon inflation sleeve only, but not the lower part of the ball. Carl responded in response to the query, what is the great American novel? A story of travel and restlessness with information about cultures and waiting for someone with enough compassion and intelligence to reinflate him and send him on his next destination after carefully emptying the condensation from his engine module compartment. But that's a personal vision also. He added, if you subscribe to the American dream, it's Colonel Sanders, Gene Kirkpatrick, and the Wall Street Journal. The following evening, partly to visit with the newly arrived Carl and partly, admittedly, to gather opinions, I revisited Somerville and came across Grace, who was Dave Kellogg's girlfriend, age 30, who also worked at a travel agency. As the apartment's malfunctioning smoke alarm chirped with a disconcerting twing, Grace replied, it would have to be about a woman since the majority of Americans are women. It would have to be about this 36-year-old wife whose 15-year-old son died 2 years ago, and she's finally coming to terms with it. Dave was flabbergasted. You got it all plotted out, don't you? Uh-huh, said she. We were to meet Carl and company at a bar down the street. When we arrived, Deb, a friend of Meg's, said, my first response is that the great American novel would be about, I think that what I'm going to tell you about is the kind of novel I'd like to read, intergenerational trends within a family, such as the types of attitudes, thoughts, and feelings a mother passes down to daughter, or that, even further than that, from great-grandmother to mother to daughter, and I would want to see a couple of other things. 1. More day-to-day realism than I've encountered in any of the novels I've read recently. It has been done, but it hasn't been done very well. 2. Attention to a kind of deeper feeling, kind of more unconscious trends, more of a psychological approach. The following day I got a phone call from my former girlfriend, and when I asked her the question, she said in her sensible way in response, probably life and death. And then for several days I abandoned my quest, though when I picked it up again, it was to be with a vengeance. One Saturday evening, after attending a concert featuring bands called The Hopelessly Obscure, The Beachmasters, and a third band from Los Angeles of that ilk, I decided to attend a party on Beacon Hill to which Billy Ruane had been invited. The fact that it was after 2 in the morning didn't stop me. The fact that there were 4 couples present made me the odd man out, but that didn't bother me much either. And I was gratified by the healthy vigor of the replies. In short, a satisfactory evening. The first person I asked was one Kate Hughes, DJ/librarian, aged 22. There have already been a few. Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49, about alienation being the only form of connectedness you can have, is one. I think it's going to involve really how people end up believing this fucked up thing. To me, it's the great American novel would be like any number of great American things, because basically people want to subscribe to some ideology, some kind of closed-mindedness, not including everything that doesn't matter. The great American thing is whatever myth you have about your country, subscribe to, disagree with, especially with Americans. It can accompany a number of different things, especially because people think they can do whatever the fuck they want, which is also not true. Essentially, the great American novel is about the constant frustration of all the myths you might once have subscribed to. We argued for close to half an hour over whether there were any authentic myths left to speak of. Kate asserted that there were. I protested that it seemed that nowadays people were being force-fed mythic or myth-based material which they regarded as myth, but which was superimposed from above and therefore failed to meet the criteria of genuine folk-based myth. Kate maintained that A, people have always had myths forced on them by their social superiors, so-called, and that B, the fact that they came from above does not necessarily invalidate them as the product of a folk-based sensibility. In the background, a song by the California-based thrash combo The Minutemen was progressivism and regressionism, between intellectualism and anti-intellectualism, between cosmopolitanism and hokey down-homeism. In the background, the following conversation about the music on the tape deck. Who's this? Satan. Cool. Corey went on. If and when I have children, I'm going to make sure they're all born in a fucking log cabin. The last president, to my knowledge, born in a log cabin was William Henry Harrison. And incidentally, I'm going to make sure, if inaugurated, that they don't die of pneumonia. Getting back to the main topic of discussion, Corey Lou Brennan said, it has to be about 500 pages. Has to have a fair measure of thinly veiled pornographic material, or else nobody will buy it. And it has to sell fairly well at the time, or else it will have to be filed into the bargain bin rather than the coffee table, which it so richly deserves. I reminded him that Moby Dick was first published in England and sold very few copies in the United States. He argued that this approach to great literature not doing well was fine in the 19th century, but that times had changed and resumed. But seriously, the great American novel must sell moderately well at the time, embrace sophisticated and anti-sophisticated values, and feature a goodly measure of larger-than-life personalities that the American public can readily identify with or despise. Identify with, i.e. Andrew Jackson, Ike Eisenhower, or despise, i.e. John Quincy Adams Stevenson. And then I'll make some stupid banal comment like, that's the way I'll see the whole thing. Classic struggles in American society are embodied in this whole thing. In one sentence, the American public is never seen in a stronger light than in the ridiculous hoopla which has surrounded presidential elections since the year dot. That's it. That's my editorial guidelines. We had a discussion about our literary interests. I told him at one time I had studied epic poetry. In fact, 11 years later, I spoke with him. He said, hey, what about that epic poem that you were talking about? You were writing. How come you never did anything with that? When we first met, that's what we talked about. He seemed pleased with this revelation. He had studied classics. Somehow the talk turned to Paradise Lost. He asked me what verse scheme that was written in. I, lamely and by now somewhat drunkenly, said, why, the immortal Miltonic line, of course, having forgotten, in my befuddlement, that the thing had been written in blank verse. By now it was close to 4 a.m. I was offered a ride home, which I eagerly accepted, but delayed my benefactor, who I believe was Kate, by asking a few people who were there clustered around the door, presumably also on their way out, the question, what is the great American novel? Sex and Power, said Miles, age 21, student. Life, said Eden, age 25, student. Life in general, the meaning of life, says Susan, age 19, student. The following afternoon, I spoke to Lang Zenner, manager of a band now defunct called the Archbishop's Enema Fetish, on the phone. His reply, all things considered, was surprisingly pacific. The Cola Wars, he said. The following day, I got another call. I got a call from another person involved, howsoever peripherally, in the world of music. His reply was as follows. A great American novel, rich, something to do with people working hard and becoming very rich. This is my old buddy Dave. It was not very long afterwards, at the apartment in the shabbier part of the city, that I was introduced to Sarge, a pseudonym, 27, a journalist and actor who lived in Rome, and who asked me to pull a tie tighter around his arm while he gave himself an injection of heroin, which he did. Well pleased, he told me the following. I think it still has a great deal to do with the Fabrizio del Dango in the Charterhouse of Parma. It would be a sort of autobiographical. The great American novel involves experience and travail. The anti-hero protagonist is a semi-autobiographical character who encounters various strange or life-threatening revelatory experiences. That's the great American novel as I see it. How a protagonist goes through various encounters and coming out of the experience somehow enlightened Dunno whether in a pessimistic or an uplifting way. Much more anticlimactic than these mailer escalators. The great American novel brings to mind Hemingway and Fitzgerald and that whole egomaniacal type concept. The Ghostwriter was the only thing of Roth's I enjoyed, other than pornographic bits from Portnoy's Complaint and his depictions of the desperate age of masturbation. We went to the spacious roof of this apartment building where Sarge told a story about how he and his other guest had gone to Roxbury to buy drugs, and when the shotgun came out, the guest got into the seat of the car and cowered, while he, Sarge, calmly kept his senses. Now here is where the stalking the hippogriff was originally to have ended, but then there was some additional supplementary material, which I think I'll have just barely enough time to get through before the end of this evening's presentation.
No, skip that. Let's see, how do we put this on mute?
NBC 10 and WHJJ, your Storm Team Network. Use caution on the roads because we've got a quick hitting low pressure area.
I'll just turn
Only
the
source
everything
you
on,
need.
right? Yeah. How's that? Come on. This thing, you know, these machines are difficult. Hi, I'm the wrong hero. And this has been Post-Atomic Fables here on Cafe Cabaret, and I'm very sorry about this